Hi, and welcome to my video on channel masking in Photoshop. When you save a selection in Photoshop, it becomes a channel in the Channels panel. You can use this channel anytime to reload it as a selection or use it as a mask on a layer. But there are times when a selection could use some refinement. When you use tools such as Select Sky, Select Subject, the Quick Selection tool, or the Object Selection tool, the boundaries of these selections may need some work. There are several ways to edit a selection in Photoshop, such as select and mask, but modifying a channel can be a very quick and easy way to accomplish this task. Today I will show you how to create a selection, save it to the Channels panel, modify it, and apply it to a layer as a mask. So let's get started. So just what are channels? Every image in Photoshop contains the RGB, red, green, and blue channels. The RGB channel contains all of the color information in the image. The red, green, and blue channels are displayed as black and white representations of the image, showing you how much of that color exists in the image. The red channel is shown here, and brighter tones are where more red pixels exist, whereas darker tones are where less red pixels exist. A practical use of these channels would be to use them as luminosity masks on layers. Do not modify any of these channels. Instead, make a working copy to do any modifications. Any selection you create can be saved. It is then stored in the Channels panel. Saved channels can be loaded as selections and then added to a layer as a mask. Lastly, you can modify any saved channel. I will now demonstrate channel masking on two examples. Before you use any of these techniques, you'll want to make sure that you have the Layers panel and the Channels panel active in your Photoshop workspace. If they're not, go under the Window menu and you can find Layers and Channels in there, and you can add them to your workspace. I like to have them in separate areas in my workspace, in other words, not in the same tab group, so that I can use them both at the same time, basically. And so you can see my Layers panel is in a tab group with histogram, libraries, and history. And my Channels panel is in a tab group with actions and paths. We'll get started on this image. I shot this at Smith Rock State Park in Central Oregon. And it's a little washed out, a little dull, needs some contrast. But what I want to do is separate the land from the sky and work on each independently. So to get started, I'm going to create a couple of layers to work on. I want to keep the background layer intact as it was originally to preserve non-destructive editing. So right click on the background layer and click Duplicate Layer. And I'm going to call this layer Land. Right click on the land layer, duplicate it again, and I'm going to call this layer Sky. Click OK, and now I have my two working layers. Next thing I want to do is select the sky. There's several ways to do it, but Photoshop's new function, Select Sky, works pretty well. So I'm going to click on that. And you see the marching ants. It looks pretty good, but we'll see how good it is here in a minute. So what I want to do after I made the selection is save it. I'll go into the Select menu, down towards the bottom, Save Selection, and I'm going to call this Selection Sky. Click OK, and you'll notice that it shows up in the Channels panel. Whenever you save a selection, it's saved in the Channels panel. So now I can get rid of the marching ants. And so I'm going to go into the select menu, deselect. And now I want to see how good this selection was. Since it's saved in the channels panel, I'm going to click on that channel. It activates the channel and turns off the RGB channels. So now I'm seeing this channel in black and white, and you can see that there are some gray areas in the land, especially in the land, and probably hard to see in the video, but there's some gray areas here in the sky where there was some clouds. And so that means that the selection had some feathering, and it's not a real accurate selection between the sky and the land. So I'm going to modify this sky channel to make this selection more accurate, separating the sky from the land much better. And it's pretty simple. I'm going to start by using the dodge tool right here, and dodging lightens areas and highlights appear in the upper right for the range is selected, and I'll leave the exposure at 50%. Should be okay. And you'll notice when I click, I'm going to click and drag, and it'll paint the dodge tool onto this image. And when I go over the light areas, again, it's probably hard to see, but it's lightening those light areas. But if I click and drag down in the dark areas, it's not affecting those because the range is set to highlights. And so I'm done with that. Next, I'll go to the burn tool, and that's right here. And the range is set to shadows now. I'll leave the exposure at 50%. And I'm going to click and drag over these dark areas to darken them. And I'm clicking and dragging, and you can see those gray areas turning black, and that's what I want. And the more I click and drag, the more of this burning is being applied, and that looks pretty good. I see there's a little gray area in here that I missed with the dodge tool, so I'm going to go back to the dodge tool and simply dodge in that area there. And now my selection, or my channel, is looking pretty good, but I want to make sure that it's really well separated with whites and blacks. And so now what I'm going to do is go under the image menu, under adjustments, and click on levels. And there's the levels panel. Blacks are on the left, brights are on the right, and there's really nothing in there. It looks pretty white and black, but when I drag this right slider over just past that line of white pixels, and correspondingly the left slider, drag it to the right a little bit, it ensures that all that's left is white and black. So I'll click OK, and now my channel has been updated. Now I want to use this channel as a selection on my sky layer. And so what I'll do is click and drag the sky channel down to this little icon down here, and that is the load channel as selection icon. And so just click and drag it down, and it loads it as a selection. I want to turn back on the RGB, turn off the channel so we can see the color image. And you'll see the marching ants look similar, but they're much more refined based on the modifications and the edits that I did. And so now my selection is active based on that modified sky channel. And now the sky channel is the active, the sky layer is the active layer. And so down at the bottom of the layers panel is this icon, add layer mask. So now the sky selection that was modified from the sky channel is added to the sky layer as a mask. So whenever you have an active selection and you apply a mask to a layer, it uses that selection to create the black and white mask. And so now what I'm going to do is create a curves adjustment layer that'll come in above the sky layer. It automatically creates it with a white mask, but I'm not worried about that. And now I'm going to modify this curve, and I'm going to drag the darks down and the highlights up. Maybe drag the midtones down a little bit. And I'm just focusing my attention on what it's doing to the sky. And I'll show you what will happen here in a minute. Maybe drag the darks up just a little bit for the sky. Midtones down a little more. Just looking for more contrast in the sky. And I don't really care what it does to the land. But you will notice that this curves adjustment affects the entire image. That's because this curves layer is on top of the stack and it's affecting all the layers below it. And so to fix that, I'm going to hold my Alt or Option key down, and my cursor is just on the border in between the curves and the sky layer. And when I hold the Alt or Option key down, it turns to this little downward pointing arrow. And I'll just click the mouse, and what that does, it clips the curves layer to the sky layer, and no other layers are affected by the curves adjustment. And so now when I turn the curves layer on and off, because of the mask on the sky layer, that curves adjustment only applies to the sky. So to complete my edits, I'm going to make the land layer active and create another curves layer right above it. I don't need to clip this layer because everything below is fine. And I'll make a curves adjustment to the land effectively, and when I exaggerate it, you see that it's not affecting the sky, it's only affecting the land. And so drag the darks down a little bit, bring the highlights up. Basically an S-curve for contrast. I'll exaggerate it a little bit for the video. And there you have it. And so before and after of everything, there's before, there's after, and I've effectively separated the sky from the land with a modified sky channel selection, applied it to the sky layer as a mask, and made two curves adjustments, one for the sky, one for the land. And there you have it. So here's another image from Smith Rock State Park in Central Oregon. And with this image, I want to again separate the land from the sky and work on each independently. And I want to do that with a mask. And so to get started, this time I'm going to use Smart Objects in Photoshop. And I'm in Lightroom right now. And here on the image, I'm just going to right-click on the image, go to Edit In, open a Smart Object in Photoshop. There it is in Photoshop. It's a smart object denoted by this little badge in the corner of the thumbnail of the layer. And what I want to do is duplicate this layer. But I can't just right-click on it and select Duplicate Layer, because it'll link the two smart object layers together, and any edit that I make on one layer will be applied to the other. And so to get around that, go into the Layer menu, Smart Objects, New Smart Object via Copy. And that creates a copy of the layer, but they're not linked together. And so I can make edits to each one of these independently. So the next thing I want to do is select the sky. Go to the select menu, sky. You can see the marching ants. And again, they look pretty good, but we'll see how good they are in a second here. So go under select, save selection. I'm going to name this selection sky, and it's saved in the channels panel. I can go under select, deselect to get rid of the marching ants. And now I'm going to select the sky channel to activate it and turn off all the color. And when I zoom in, hopefully you can see the gray areas in the land, and there are some gray areas in the sky. And ideally I would like the land to be completely black for this channel or this selection, and the sky to be completely white. Let me zoom back out a little bit. And I'm going to start with the levels adjustment. And that would be under Image, Adjustments, Levels. There's my levels panel. And you can see there are some dark pixels and some light pixels in this channel. And so I'm going to drag the left slider over to effectively eliminate or darken the dark pixels. Drag the right slider over to brighten the bright pixels. And I'm going to drag the midtone slider to the left to darken the midtones. Click OK, and there's that adjustment. Let's zoom in and see, not that much. Still some gray areas over here in the sky a little bit. It's looking pretty good, but we can do a little bit better. And so what I'm going to do is start with the dodge tool to brighten the bright areas. Again, range is highlights, exposure is 50%. That's fine. And I'm going to click and drag, and I'm going over these areas up in the sky around the boundary with the land to brighten those pixels. Now I'll go to the burn tool to darken the dark areas. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can hopefully see it a little better. And here I'm going to click and drag, and some of those darker pixels are getting much darker. They're nice and black. Click and drag, burning that area, click and drag, and that's looking pretty good. Zoom back out. So my sky channel is now modified. So now my sky layer is active, and I'm going to rename that. Should have done that from the beginning. Double click on the text, type in sky, double click on the text of the land layer, type in land, and now they are better described. And so I'll activate the sky layer, and I'm going to drag the sky channel down to the load channel as selection icon at the bottom of the channels panel. So we'll drag it down there, and now my marching ants are active. So I have an active selection. Sky layer is active. Click on the add layer mask icon, and it applies that selection as a mask to the layer. Now I've effectively separated my sky from my land, and I can make edits independently. Now, since I sent this over as a smart object from Lightroom, I can use Camera Raw to make edits on each layer independently. And so I'm going to start on the sky layer, double click on the smart object icon. It takes me into Camera Raw. And When I make edits here, and I'll just show you with exposure, it does make the edits to the entire image. But back in Photoshop, that mask will control everything. And so I'm focusing my attention on the sky here and not on the land with these edits. And really all I want to do is turn down the temperature to just make the sky a more deep blue. And that's about all I'm going to do there. And I'll click OK in Camera Raw. It makes the adjustments back in Photoshop. Probably hard to see, but it's subtle. But the sky is now a nice deep blue. Now I'm going to go into the land layer on the Smart Object and double click that. Opens up Camera Raw. And again, these edits will be global, but back in Photoshop, the mask will control the separation. And so here I want to warm up the land a little bit. Just add a little warmth. Going to bring down the highlights a little bit. Somewhere in there. Bring up the whites, and this adds bright tone contrast. I'm going to increase the shadows and decrease the blacks a little bit to add some dark tone contrast. I'm going to increase the clarity just to add some mid-tone pop. Maybe a little bit of texture. Kind of a nice little sharpening effect. Add a little vibrance to bring out some of those colors. And based on those edits, a little bit too warm on the color temperature, so I'm going to turn that down a little bit, somewhere around in there. The last thing I'll do is go into the color mixer, which is the same as HSL in Lightroom. And under the Luminance tab, I'm going to brighten the orange channel, and it brightens the oranges in the image. And I'm going to decrease the yellows, and this adds some contrast between those two channels. Click OK. Takes me back to Lightroom, and you'll see the land change and not the sky. So I'm going to go under File, Save. Saves the image, and this will save a Photoshop version back to Lightroom. And while it's doing that, just to recap, I created two separate layers. I made a sky selection with Select Sky, saved it as a channel in the Channels panel, and I used that channel and modified it with levels adjustment and some dodging and burning to refine the black areas and the white areas and have some nice crisp edges between the land and the sky with that selection. No feathering. So that's saved. I'm going to go back to Lightroom. And here is the Photoshop version. Here is the original. This ends my video on channel masking in Photoshop. I hope it was useful, and thanks for watching.